Hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout and on Substack of Outspoken. And as promised, I'm here to read to you my latest essay, which is generating a lot of commentary about why aggressive ICE protesters are closer to being the actual fascists than they realize. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. And it's called Dear Beloved Elder, Please Stop. Subtitle is Your Support for the Anti-ICE Protest Movement Will Destroy Us. And in brackets, it says, the following is a letter I wrote in response to a conversation with a beloved relative. End brackets. Dear beloved elder relative, this is a letter to urge you to rethink what you are doing in supporting the protests against ICE's law enforcement activities and to ask you please actually to stop. You and your friends at times lend your support to the anti-ICE protests in your adorable little town. And you know I support First Amendment protected expression whenever citizens wish to express themselves. But there are larger implications here, beloved elder. I love you. I respect you. I appreciate very much that you let me think about your responses to news events and even let me describe them publicly at times when I need a model of what a thoughtful liberal person who lives in a deep blue state and watches CNN and listens to NPR believes. I appreciate that you, unlike most of the folks in your tribe, are always open to the evidence I share, even when it is contrary to these narratives. I appreciate that you consider my evidence open-mindedly, even when we do not agree at first, and even when we continue to disagree. At times, you join your friends at the local anti-ICE protests, which take place in the city hall of your tiny, comfortable town in your beautiful Western state. You and your friends are showing up as you see it for your neighbors, and you are putting your bodies on the line, which sensibility carries a pleasing echo of the advance guard of the civil rights movement of the early 1960s, which happened in your living memory. This interpretation of what you are doing, no doubt, feels good, as there are indeed too few roles for our elders to play in our society that tap their latent heroism and sense of devotedness to others. You all also feel, I gather, that you are, quote, engaging in radical compassion, end quote, a phrase I've just started hearing from multiple sources, and one that worries me for its neo-Marxist and implicitly extremist implications. And you are sure that you are all aligning with one another on the right side of history. You also reasonably, in some ways, are concerned that ICE agents have no badges and that they cover their faces. I know that you and your protesting friends who are of your generation or of a generation younger, wearing North Face or REI jackets and Ecuadorian inspired or actually indigenous made mittens and headbands against the cold, greeting one another with happy smiles in the forbidding weather, uplifted by the energy of altruism, mean very well. I know you see this as a simple David and Goliath conflict with you all in the role of David. But I think that that interpretation of events is deceptive. I also must note that your fellow anti-ICE protesters, like anti-ICE protesters across the country, are overwhelmingly white. You and your protesting friends are overwhelmingly, though not exclusively, upper middle class or even wealthy. ICE agents are often barely middle class. The starting salary for an ICE agent is as low as $33,400, and that they average $32 an hour. I must also note that 49.3% of them are not white. The second most represented ethnic groups of ICE agents is Hispanic, and then African American. More than 15% of ICE agents are disabled. Nonetheless, you and your friends truly do believe that ICE is a lawless militia sent by someone whom you also truly believe is a quasi-dictator. Your news outlets and social media feeds communicate to you that ICE is attacking people who are here having committed an, quote, administrative offense, who are, quote, our neighbors, who, quote, just want to work in our country. I understand that you feel sure that in, quote, standing up against ICE operating in your community, you're standing up against incipient or actual fascism. I applaud your civic energy, even as I think it is sorely misguided in this situation. And now I'm going to share the screen. I can't share the screen because I'm on Safari, so I will just keep reading. You and your friends also believe that the protesters in Minnesota are simply peacefully using their First Amendment protected rights to have their say, and that the deaths of the late anti-ICE activists, poet Renee Good and VA nurse Alex Preddy, who both were shot to death in conflicts with ICE agents in Minnesota, are examples of the mayhem being wreaked by a lawless violence of a band of thugs. When Alex Preddy was killed, you and I spoke about it by phone. Our disagreement was too painful, so we stopped our phone conversation and signed off. You felt that Alex Preddy was murdered in cold blood. I texted you, quote, Alex Preddy had a weapon with a loaded magazine. Then I sent you this, a CNN article and video appearing to show that a federal officer took a gun from Preddy just before the shooting that killed Preddy. I texted, if you don't plan to use a weapon, you don't load it. Very dangerous situation. You replied via text, it was holstered. He was shot. The NRA spoke out against this. I texted back, quote, I don't doubt it, but, beloved elder, bringing a loaded weapon to a protest is a very dangerous thing to do. Anyone aware of a loaded gun, holstered or not, will assume it's a shooter situation. I should have texted, may assume. Frustrated by the fact that the media to which you listen often misrepresent original quotes, I tracked down what the NRA had actually said. I texted you then, quote, in a separate social media post, and this is a quote from an article, the NRA said, quote, as there is with any officer-involved shooting, there will be a robust and comprehensive investigation that takes place to determine if the use of force is justified. As we await these facts and gain a clearer understanding, we urge the political voices to lower the temperature to ensure their constituents and law enforcement officers stay safe, end quote. And then this is me again. The NRA is saying that there should be a full investigation and that everyone should lower the temperature. That is not the same as condemning the shooting. Beloved elder, I texted further, I wish you and your friends would consider what it is like to live in a society without the rule of law. It's a catastrophe, but especially for women, children, and the elderly. You have to see how difficult and dangerous it's being made for ICE to do their jobs enforcing U.S. law, which again, if you don't like the law, change it. But for now, the law says that people here illegally must be detained and deported, as is the case in almost all other countries, end quote. You replied by text, he had a license, he didn't do anything to be shot 10 times and murdered. You also texted, he was murdered trying to protect a woman. They fired 10 shots into him and murdered him. He did not deserve that, end quote. I see from your point of view how black and white you see the situation to be, but please consider that you may be wrong. I have rarely brought up an issue as serious and impactful in regards to our shared future in this country as the one I am broaching. Beloved relative, I want you to understand that ICE is not a lawless militia. This is a really important point for you and your friends and half the nation to take on board. ICE agents are not making up their own rules as they go along or flouting the laws of our nation. I've written about lawless militias and their dangers ever since my book, The End of America, was published in 2007. I know a lot about thugs and lawless state-sanctioned violence, about its nuances and its history. Fascist dictator Benito Mussolini took over Italy, at that time a fragile democracy, by sending groups of black shirts, thugs who obeyed no laws, who were acting externally to the existing laws of Italy. The black shirts surrounded voting booths and intimidated voters, often using violence. They strategically attacked key leaders of Italian civil society, newspaper editors, national political opposition leaders, local mayors. They beat them severely. They killed, tortured, and threatened numberless members of Italian civil society. Their goal was to intimidate those, the judiciary, the parliamentarians, even the local police who might otherwise bring them to justice. This tactic worked so well and so quickly that when Mussolini marched on Rome in 1922, he was able to take over power because parliamentarians were looking at his massed band of thugs and knew that they were already defeated. The existing government resigned, and King Victor Emmanuel III simply handed over power. Thousands of black shirts with Benito Mussolini marched on Rome in October 1922. Shockingly to me, as the granddaughter, there is a worldwide rush for gold right now and precious metals. China is buying gold. There are rumors that the Federal Reserve will be using gold to pay off federal debt, or the federal government will be using gold to pay off federal debt. Famous investors are buying gold. And there's a movement away from the dollar worldwide. And you can see that there are warning signs in the economy that appeared before the Great Depression in 2008 that are flashing red right now. So in all this instability, it is a very good idea to protect your savings, to protect your IRA by diversifying into precious metals, especially gold. There are a lot of gold companies out there. Not all of them are kosher. Not all of them are responsible businesses. American Alternative Assets really is. And we're very, very proud to have them as a sponsor. We're very picky about our sponsors, and we only accept sponsors who have products that we either use or invest in ourselves. So I really encourage you to go to cloutgold.com, cloutgold.com, and get a free report explaining to you what the risks are of not diversifying into gold and silver. And I just want to note that when Brian and I started talking about investing in gold 5 years ago, when it first became clear that you could do that easily, if we'd put in $1,000 then, it would be 5,000 now. If we'd put in 10,000 then, it would be 50,000 now, and so on. So obviously you can't predict everything about the future, but gold there's a limited amount of it on the planet. And in a time when you can have your assets switched off if they're digital, like the truckers in Canada had their bank account switched off. People in Spain are having their bank account switched off. All of China is now on a social credit system. Your assets can be switched off. And Europe is pushing for central bank digital currency. Now is the time to diversify into gold. Of a man and a woman who lost 9 siblings along with their young families to actual extrajudicial Nazi violence and murder, commentators such as the Late Show host Stephen Colbert and others are now referring to ICE as being worse than Nazis. Nazis, at least, Colbert said, were willing to show their faces. And I've got an image of Stephen Colbert receiving an Emmy, smiling, surrounded by celebrities. And my note there is Stephen Colbert, who took on verbally people who are worse than Nazis. Like Mussolini's black shirts, upon which they were modeled, the SS and the SA, Hitler's informal thug caste, which were unleashed onto German cities before Hitler seized power in 1933, wielded their violence outside of existing German laws. The Nazi paramilitary disregarded German law in its rise to power. Quote, the Nazi Party's paramilitary organization were the Sturmabteilung, more commonly known as the SA. The SA were formed in 1921 and were known as brown shirts due to their brown uniform. Initially, most members were ex-soldiers or unemployed men, violent and often disorderly. The SA were primarily responsible for the protection of leading Nazis and disrupting other political opponents' meetings, although they often had a free rein on their activities. The SA and the SS became symbols of terror. The Nazi Party used these two forces to terrify their opposition into subordination, slowly eliminate them entirely, or scare people into supporting them, end quote. Remember that when the brown shirts started seizing and beating people in makeshift basement detention centers, Germany was still a fragile democracy. It still had a parliament and a set of laws. including guarantees of due process and prohibitions against excessive state violence. The lawlessness deployed by the SA in those pre-1933 years was the reason that they, like the black shirts before them, were so effective and terrifying. The existing laws of Germany did not restrain them, and as in Italy, judges, civil society leaders, and local police were too frightened by SA violence to enforce the existing laws. The brown shirts, quote, arrested, really seized citizens, communists, newspaper editors and owners, businessmen, opposition leaders, Jews, random Germans, whom neighbors singled out as being not sufficiently supportive of National Socialism. Quote, by engaging in violence, the Nazis increased their visibility, especially in large cities like Berlin, where it was easy for a speaker to get lost in the crowd. Then, since police presence was inevitable, the forces of order became a protective force around the SA during their marches. Finally, quote, seemingly audacious acts of provocation were able to occur precisely because there was little risk of them growing out of hand and, quote, elated those who participated in them and thereby attracted new followers, end quote. And this is all one long quote. One can only marvel at the sheer genius of Nazi political activity. Quote, when Hitler finally rose to power, the street violence changed and became an adjunct of state power, and brown shirts set up their own illegal prisons, 240 where torture was carried out, and 11 early concentration camps where they acted with impunity. Quote, the centralized locations of many of these provisional prisons and torture chambers made the early SA terror a highly visible and at times audible element of Nazi rule, end quote. Excuse me. If SA violence during the run-up to power was a harbinger of what would transpire when the party achieved power, SA actions when that finally occurred set the tone for the following 12 years, end quote. And now this is me again. An account in the Garden of the in the Garden of the Beasts, Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin by historian Eric Larson captures the day-to-day life of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's U.S. ambassador to Germany in 1933 and 1934, Professor William E. Dodd. Professor Dodd noted that when an American citizen was seized by the SA, he was beaten so badly that he could not leave his bed for days. When he finally made it to the U.S. Embassy, his body was a mass of bloody pulp. By the time that Hitler engineered his full seizure of power after a questionable arson attack on the Reichstag, the nation had already been traumatized and tenderized by the completely lawless violence of the SA. ICE, in contrast, dear beloved elder, is part of a federal agency that is bound by a multitude of laws. The agency and its agents are also bound by the Constitution. ICE is governed by almost 400 federal statutes. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE is primarily governed by federal immigration statutes, the U.S. Constitution, and Department of Homeland Security policies. DHS policy limits the use of force. Quote, general statement, unless further restricted by DHS component policy, DHS LEOs, law enforcement officers, are permitted to use force to control subjects in the course of their official duties as authorized by law and in defense of themselves and others. In doing so, a LEO shall use only the force that is objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting him or her at the time the force is applied. End quote. In other words, the DHS policy that outlines the permitted use of force in defense of themselves and others dates from 2018. It is a President Joe Biden policy, beloved elder. Agents must also abide by the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fourth Amendment ensures that ICE agents must have a reasonable suspicion before detaining anyone. It also prevents their entry into non-consenting homes without a judicial warrant. Let's remember what the Fourth Amendment actually says. It does not say that no law enforcement can ever enter your home. Rather, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That end quote. That is exactly what DHS guidelines spell out. Agents need, quote, probable cause or a, quote, reasonable suspicion and a warrant in order to enter a non-consenting home. Your standing between the ICE agents in your town and such homes is not, in fact, providing a bulwark against fascism. It is actually creating an obstruction to the provisions of the Fourth Amendment. Key laws and regulations that govern ICE and limit their activities include laws that have been on the books for decades, such as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. This gives the legal foundation for immigration enforcement and includes oversight of identifying, detaining, and removing illegal aliens. Federal Statute Title 18 was enacted in 1948. It authorizes law enforcement to prevent the illegal movement of both people and goods. That governs ICE. Federal Statute Title 8, enacted in 1952, applies to immigration, refugees, naturalization, and to removing people who are here illegally. The laws that govern ICE have been the law of our land for decades. President Trump did not invent the legal underpinnings for what ICE is doing in 2026. The Congresses of the 1940s and 1950s, in your infancy and childhood, did, beloved elder. If ICE agents break any laws, there is recourse. ICE frequently uses administrative warrants, Form 1-200, that require, quote, specific articulable facts to justify detention in order to enter homes. Targets of ICE arrests have the right to refuse a search of their persons and belongings if the agents have no probable cause to search them. And importantly, as noted above, ICE may not use excessive force. ICE must follow the same, quote, objective reasonableness standard of using force as do local police. So, ICE is not the Gestapo. The legally restricted conditions in which ICE operates are the opposite of the Gestapo's lawless work conditions. ICE's actions are all subject to legal review, and they must adhere to federal statutes, the Constitution, and DHS policies. I see that some people are very upset that sometimes American citizens have been mistakenly detained by ICE. This kind of error on the ground is inevitable. I feel that people are incredibly naive about what it means practically to seek to detain, process, and deport even 1,000 people in a dense city, let alone 1 million people who are here illegally, let alone 17 to 30 million, many of whom are from contexts of extreme violence already. By definition, beloved elder, this is an operation that takes on, as careful as ICE agents may be, the risk of errors inherent in conducting a mass operation of law enforcement against people who are by definition not compliant with federal laws to start with. This mass operation is taking place in conditions of extreme stress and danger and on an immense scale. Parentheses. If people don't want to risk a potentially rough or emotionally upsetting encounter with an arrest by ICE, they can just go home. DHS gives them a free plane ticket and $2,600 per person from your tax dollars in order to do so. A family of four will have a year's income in many countries by taking up this offer. End parentheses. Even if ICE were not surrounded frequently and, as in Minnesota, perilously to them and others with screaming, provocative, and physically intimidating observers, protesters, such mistakes will be made. But guess what? If you are falsely arrested by local law enforcement or ICE or anyone in a policing role in the United States, you eventually get released. Ah, there goes my earring. I have been arrested twice in my life for protest, as you know. The first time in about 1985 or 1986, I was a young Rhodes Scholar. I was in London with a group of Rhodes Scholars and other Oxford University students. We were protesting outside the US Embassy against then President Ronald Reagan's policies in El Salvador. I was eventually handcuffed by a bored, quote, Bobby, British police officer, who commented silly season, meaning that it was summertime when protests were more frequent. He put me in a holding cell for several hours till I was released, with no further action taken against me. The rule of law protected me then. It had been weakened in Britain since. It has been weakened in Britain since, and I would not wish to be at the mercy of the British justice system today. But my own peaceful and compliant actions also protected me and ensured that my protest and arrest would not escalate into violence. In 2011, I was arrested again outside a Huffington Post gala to which I had been invited. I was arrested for explaining to Occupy Wall Street protesters that so long as they did not impede pedestrian traffic, they had the legal right to protest peacefully on the sidewalk outside the gala. I told the protesters their rights. I did not tell them to do things that they had no legal right to do. I did not instruct the Occupy Wall Street protesters to obstruct the pavement or the movement of NYPD. I knew local New York City law, and their obstruction of NYPD would not have been legal. I did not encourage the Occupy Wall Street protesters to form barricades preventing NYPD vans from proceeding in traffic, thus endangering not just NYPD but nearby residents by keeping ambulances and fire trucks from reaching them. I did not instruct the Occupy protesters to confront unrelated pedestrians outside of the gala to demand their papers or to block their entrances to the gala. I did not urge the protesters to make pedestrians swear that they are not members of this or that group, as protesters are doing in Minnesota in demanding that passing cars and pedestrians swear that they are not ICE. I did not do any of that, and I would never have done any of that because none of those actions are First Amendment protected speech or actions, and all of them violate local and federal laws. Those are, in fact, very violent, very threatening, very insurrectionary, non-1A protected actions. And the fact that protesters are committing those actions does not make them 1A protected or even moral, beloved elder. You can see how illegally the NYPD behaved in the videos of my 2011 New York City arrest. This second arrest was a much scarier experience than the first arrest had been. I was put handcuffed into a windowless van that took me to a separate precinct, far from the eyes of legal observers. I was held in a blood and feces smeared cell for a number of hours and then released with a trial date. If I had been convicted, I would have been sent on to the violent prison, Rikers Island. But the charges were eventually dropped. The system worked. What also worked within this constitutional system was the fact that I understood my own responsibilities as a protester. I did not break the law, either before my arrest, during it, or after it. Though I knew I was being unlawfully and unconstitutionally arrested, and though I tried calmly to cite to the police chief arresting me the New York City law that allowed protest on the pavement if it did not obstruct pedestrians, I submitted to arrest without any resistance, and that's in italics. You can see that in the video. It wasn't because I was too scared to resist arrest, though I was indeed scared. It was not because I was not passionate about the issue, free expression that had led to the confrontation in the first place. I submitted peacefully to an unlawful arrest because I respect the Constitution and the rule of law. I knew that the place to fight an unlawful arrest was in the court system and not physically, not screaming, writhing, or kicking on the sidewalk, or provoking what could be an enraged mob to threaten NYPD. I didn't shout obscenities. I did not go limp and force NYPD to handle me bodily. I did not spit or struggle. By the way, thinking about this, I'll never forget that the crowd of protesters around me, who were very much on my side, were looking to me and my partner at the time for how we would react. And I have no doubt that if I had, resisted, fought, screamed, fallen to the ground to force them to lift me bodily, there would have been an enraged mob for sure. And greatly, it would have escalated the danger of that situation to everyone. And I didn't do that. Just as NYPD had 1A obligations as law enforcement, I had 1A obligations as a protester. So do all the protesters protesting ICE today. Just as ICE must obey the law, so must the F-ICE contingents. In all cases, this is a moral as well as a legal obligation. This is the First Amendment. Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. End quote. The First Amendment, dear elder, is not a hall pass to impede law enforcement in their federally legislated activities, to block their ingress or egress to law enforcement operations, to stalk or harass pedestrians or drivers, to disturb the peace of residents of a city, to resist arrest, or to threaten the safe functioning of emergency services transit within a town or city. None of that activity is identified as protected speech above in the Constitution. We have no right under that beautiful amendment to harass law enforcement or to torture them with drums, whistles, and screaming, all of which are tried and true methods to break down the mental health of prisoners, as we saw in the torture files of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. We have no 1A right to drive our vehicles toward law enforcement in any way, to use our vehicles to block traffic or to harass pedestrians. There is a great deal of case law and federal law showing that one has the right, for instance, to hold up signs or to speak to people outside an abortion clinic, but not to harass or block or intimidate staff or patients seeking to enter that clinic. Who pressed for such laws? You and your friends did. This was your side, beloved elder, which supported limits on the protest of right-to-life protesters. The FACE Act of 1994 forbids blocking entrances. Who signed the FACE Act? President Bill Clinton did. Quote, after its enactment by Congress, President Bill Clinton signed the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act into law. Fines for violent offenders for their first offense can be as high as $100,000, with prison sentences of 1 year. Repeat violent offenders can receive up to 3 years in prison and fines of up to $250,000. If the protest resulted in an injury to clinic staff or a patient, the prison sentence can go as high as 10 years. Quote, in the case of first-time convictions of protesters who engage in nonviolent physical obstruction, such as sit-ins or blockades, the law allows judges to impose fines of up to $10,000 and 6-month prison terms. Second convictions for these kinds of offenses are punishable by up to 18 months in jail and fines of up to $25,000. The individual harmed by the protest activities may also sue the protesters for civil damages. Quote, Congress adopted the freedom of access to clinic entrances in reaction to the increasing number of blockades of abortion clinics by anti-abortion groups and the inability or unwillingness of local law enforcement officials to protect the clinics from intimidation and violence. The italics are mine. Quote, the law was introduced in Congress after the Supreme Court ruled in Bray versus Alexandria Women's Health Clinic, 1993, that federal court judges were not permitted to invoke a Reconstruction-era civil rights law, the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, against the harassment and protest activities that frequently occurred outside abortion clinic entrances. The KKK Act prohibited conspiracies by persons seeking to deprive, quote, any persons or class of persons of equal rights, end quote. That's the history of the FACE Act, okay? You guys wanted it for good reason, because people were being harassed and obstructed in seeking abortions. Women were. Beloved elder, the laws against violent protests, the reaction from ICE to violent protests, to which you so object, are laws that your side passed under your President Clinton to stop pro-lifers from being so threatening, obstructionist, or intimidating that women's rights were curtailed. ICE is enforcing your laws. It is up to protesters to know about local and federal law regarding protest and to abide by the First Amendment. It's up to protesters peacefully to submit to arrest if they choose to protest in a way that legally allows arrest. And it is up to protesters to be aware that attacking the vehicles of law enforcement, as Alex Pretty did, is not a First Amendment protected speech act, nor is creating noise levels that harm the functioning of human beings, nor is impeding law enforcement operations in any way. 1A does not cover threatening law enforcement or anyone or communicating a threat of violence. Now, let's talk about what it means to break the law and what it means to pick and choose the laws that you enforce. It leads us as a nation of citizens to cross a barrier from which there is no returning. You may think that people here illegally are just, quote, committing a misdemeanor. It is a federal misdemeanor punishable by up to 6 months in prison, note, and that therefore you believe that their illegal presence in our country is not a big deal, and that sending in men with guns and masked faces is a massive overreaction. I would say that you are completely wrong. First of all of the illegal immigrants have broken our laws simply by being here, as I showed above. Does the rule of law matter to you at all, dear elder? Between 17 and 30 million people simply disregarded our laws in order to be present in our nation. What does it mean when you simply accept a situation in which people can pick and choose what laws they observe? History shows that you soon have a collapsed society. Second, millions of people being here illegally is a massive national security threat. Jan C. Ting argues in Immigration and National Security that, quote, the greatest threat to U.S. homeland security comes from illegals who enter the country through its porous borders in order to attack. The tide of illegal immigration must be stemmed in order to secure the United States against terrorism, end quote. Third, many of these people here illegally are actually criminals. I used to think that was a racist statement, but statistically, it's true. And hundreds of thousands engage in criminal behavior here. There are at least, I couldn't believe this number, but it's a real number, 662,566 convicted criminals or illegal aliens with pending criminal charges in the United States, and it links to a government site. That is nearly the size of the population of San Francisco when I was growing up. Fourth, those here illegally are taking resources away from low-income Americans and especially from Black and Brown Americans. In your comfortable neighborhoods, you do not see the damage. You may see a worried gardener, a concerned nanny, but in the neighborhoods where the illegal gardener or nanny may live, it is the American kids whose classes can't proceed because too few children in them speak English. It is lower income Americans who face hours-long waits in emergency rooms for themselves in pain or for their own children because of the pressure on our medical resources of people who are here illegally. It is lower income Black and Brown Americans who are expressing their frustration that the entry-level jobs that their own young adult sons and daughters used to have are no longer open to those young Americans. It is lower income Black and Brown people, as in Brooklyn, whose kids' James Madison was appropriated to house people here illegally. How is this situation okay with you? Where is your and your friends' quote radical empathy for low-income American communities, the communities of color that you all used to champion so reliably? Fifth, and most importantly, is this: there are certain unintended consequences of you and your friends choosing what U.S. laws you will block and frustrate. Please consider the long-term consequences of the F-ICE movement. This movement reminds me a lot of how insultingly Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home from that war, a war supported by Congress and by presidents. Ask the same question that U.S. military veterans asked themselves then. Why should anyone fight your wars again? Now ask, why should anyone in the future fight your future wars against crime, against natural disasters, against terrorists? No one who is not the wife or child or parent of a soldier, a sailor, a cop, a firefighter, or an ICE agent can imagine what life is like for their loved ones day to day. ICE agents, like cops, throw themselves every single day into situations in which they do not know if they will survive to see their kids and wives or husbands again. ICE agents break into houses inhabited by violent cartel members. Like soldiers in combat situations, they face situations that could erupt at any moment into gunfire or in an explosion. ICE agents don't know from one day to the next if they will be injured or killed on the job. Beloved elder, 111 police officers died in the course of doing their jobs in just 1 year, 2025. Now add to the incredibly hazardous conditions for ICE agents doing their own jobs a mass of mostly white people of all ages who are trying to make the situation even more dangerous, who are screaming into their ears or cursing at them or driving at them or blocking their egress or kicking out their taillights, as the armed Alex Preddy had done to an ICE vehicle 11 days prior to his death. In addition to the risk from the target, him or herself, ICE agents are seeking to accomplish their lawful mission in an incredibly dangerous and exhausting and emotionally draining field of operations. Soldiers in comparable conditions reliably get PTSD. ICE agents may also face mental health breakdowns from these conditions, but whether that kind of damage is done to them over time or not, what they are seeing right now is Americans, many of them who are much more privileged than they are themselves, treating them with abusiveness and contempt. Beloved elder, really think about this, what this will mean going forward. Finally, there is this. Cops and firefighters and veterans and soldiers are watching carefully how ICE agents are being treated. Unsurprisingly, 200 police officers a week are quitting or resigning in Zohran Mamdani's New York, where Governor Hochul just declared her own non-compliance with ICE operations. Beloved elder, when someone breaks into your home, you will call the cops. Do you expect them to answer? Why should ICE enforce immigration laws over time if this is how they are treated by citizens? Why should soldiers enlist to fight your wars? Why should firefighters run into your burning building? You should expect that as first responders, cops and soldiers see how ICE is being treated. They will resign or fail to reenlist or simply go through the motions when called to put themselves in harm's way. Why should you assume that police or law enforcement will ever show up for real for you and your friends if this is how you treat their colleagues? Seriously, you want to act out against ICE to endanger them, to traumatize them on the job, and to burn them out? But when you are mugged or burglarized, God forbid, you will call their colleagues and expect to be protected? Please do not be so naive. Law enforcement will just turn away from citizens and absent themselves from their now selfless civic duty. Why shouldn't they? Look at how you are treating law enforcement. Beloved elder, I have traveled in countries where the cops have given up. You still see them around. They still wear their uniforms and carry their weapons. But when a crime is underway, they inevitably don't see it happen. They turn away, knowing that there is no reason to put themselves in harm's way, no mutual social contract with citizens or with political leaders. They align with whatever warlord or real tyrant is in power. Beloved elder, when that happens, there goes the rule of law. Militias and gangs move in. People fear going outside. As in Haiti, people can't take full-time jobs because they have to wait outside the school's gates to walk their children home at 3 o'clock. Lawlessness, real lawlessness, takes over the streets. And who always, always suffers most, as I have said before, women and children, the disabled and the elderly. The ones who suffer most in a society without the rule of law, beloved elder, are people such as you and your friends. Lastly, please think about what it means when states refuse to comply with federal laws. Think of our US history. Do you really want states to pick and choose what federal laws they obey? Our system of state and federal balance and alignment was very carefully refined from the start of our nation and over time. When this mutual agreement fails, we get tragedies such as the Civil War. Leading up to the start of the Civil War and starting with South Carolina's effort to nullify a federal tariff in 1828, some states did what Minnesota and New York now threaten to do. They acted as if they knew better what to do for their constituents than to accept federal law. Southern states in 1860 and 1861 argued that the federal government had broken the contract between the states and the Union by failing to enforce the Fugitive Slaves Act. These states seceded as a result, asserting their sovereignty. As in Minnesota today, many locals in the seceding states were aligned with their state's resistance to federal authority and saw the local states' agendas in a positive light. However, was this popularity of local resistance against federal authority worth it long term? The nation fell apart into a bloody civil war. Between 600,000 and 750,000 people died. Do you want this risk? Do you want the rule of law that holds the 50 United States together as one nation, state law interacting with federal in an orderly legal process, to fly apart again? Think about Alabama in 1963. Governor Wallace used Alabama's National Guard to block African American students from enrolling at the University of Alabama. He imposed a bigoted state preference over a federal judge's ruling that the university had to be desegregated. President John F. Kennedy had to federalize the Alabama National Guard to ensure that African American students could enroll in the university. Now, it is an anti-ICE states' rights movement, beloved elder, with which you happen to agree. But what if tomorrow it is a state declaration of Sharia law in Oregon or Texas or California? Or what if it is an order by Alabama or South Carolina to resegregate the races? Do you really want to destroy the delicate, even miraculous, respectful, and legally orderly relationship in the United States between state and federal laws? If you don't like immigration laws that ICE is enforcing, change them. Seriously, you still live in a democracy. Elect people who will pass different laws. You can. But once the citizens and even states just decide what laws they will disobey, you no longer have a nation of laws, and you will have no choice about your leadership or your society at all. So I hope the above has given you pause. I respect you, I do, but this movement of which you are a part is unconstitutional madness, and that way lies the end of our nation as one of laws and not of men and women. Beloved elder, please, I beg you, reconsider. For all of our sakes and for America's, you have my heart. Please also take and consider my evidence. All my love, Naomi. That is the end of this essay. And someone asks, did she record this earlier? And the answer is no, I'm recording it live. I'm broadcasting it live. Many comments, so many comments. I wish that I could share them. Autumn Smith says, yes, this is exactly how veterans were treated when they returned from Vietnam. Thank you. Little abuse, get off the air, user. I don't know what that means. And Autumn Smith points out, not to mention all the military-aged men from over 100 different countries who are not exactly friendly to the United States who came here illegally. I do believe it's an army, or there's an army buried in there. And if you're looking at what's happening in Britain, you can see that an army is emerging in a two-tier justice system. Let's see. Lots of abuse. You're disgraceful. You know, it's my experience that when I offer a really good argument with a lot of evidence, people on the left or who are supporting the position I'm criticizing, because I think of myself as a liberal to this day, don't argue back with counterfacts. They just engage in verbal abuse. Let's see. This is why I should receive illegals being released from custody, dialogued conversation. I'm not sure what you mean, Daniel, but you are a good friend, so I'm sure there's thoughtfulness behind that, and I should understand it better if you want to amplify. Rosa 632 says, very well spoken. Thank you. Thank you. Vonda Grubb says, thank you for your voice. Thank you. Lots of nice comments. Soft 62 says, great talk. Your number 600,000 aligns with Trump's current deportation numbers. That's very, very interesting. That would, I mean, that's very interesting. What is this, beloved elder? It's a letter that I wrote to a relative of mine. I didn't want to name her, but she consented to let me address her in this way publicly. Oh, don't forget housing costs. I pay now more for a one-bedroom apartment than my old farmhouse barn 10-acre mortgage back over a decade ago. After rent and minimal utilities, I have 200 to live. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. That's crazy. I am concerned about your grocery costs, which you didn't mention. But I mean, half of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck or on credit card debt. And many people are pointing out, you know, these resources. I mean, in New York, we're $12 billion in the hole, according to our new mayor and our old mayor. We don't have the money for our own kids and our own elders and our own infrastructure and plowing the streets of snow, let alone for millions of people who are not Americans and who are not here legally. It is madness. Many people have pointed out that everything, housing, cars, transportation, becomes more expensive with this pressure of illegal immigrants, and that as they leave, in fact, costs, or as they're deporting or self-deporting, costs are dropping. I mean, not to where they should be, but there is, housing is such a good example of it, because of course, if you've got 30 million extra people in the United States, there's more demand for housing. It's going to be more expensive. Those are basic market forces. Guys, I love you. I've got to go to a meeting. Thank you. Remember to support me by subscribing. If you think this is a valuable essay, it takes a lot to write essays and research them like this. I don't just make this stuff up. That's why it's impactful. And I have a team that helps me get this out to you. So, and I'm much shadow banned to this day. So please do become a paid subscriber on my Substack Outspoken if you possibly can. It's $7 a month. And if you can't, God bless you. Please share my work if you care about it. And over on Daily Clout, you can subscribe for $3.99 a month, or you can make a one-time donation. Love you so much. I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holehouse. As we witness the unveiling, the uncovering of what a lot of us have known for some time, but now we're seeing it in the flesh, in the documentation, that there is an immense amount of evil that is running this country, other countries, the institutions, and so much more. As we kind of page through these Epstein files, one of the questions that I really hone in on is what happened to this country, and what does it mean that the founding fathers, when they set up the rules and the documents and the structure for this country, when they talked about how our nation must be a moral nation, otherwise the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, everything that they put into place to protect us from tyranny will no longer work. Yet here we are, and you look around our nation, and I would say that we have fallen very far from grace as a nation. I mean, now there's still a lot of good people in this country. I really believe that. There's a lot of good people that have just been deceived as well, that need to help. We need to help them see through the lies that have led them to where they are now. But to me, this is a really important time to have a discussion like this, and just saying, what is the future of this country if we can't figure out some way to get back to our moral roots, and some way to bring back a shared humanity and a shared understanding of the world back into America when it has been fractured into a million pieces. And so joining me today is my good friend, Chris Prosh, who I've had on multiple times before. And we're going to be kind of having a sober conversation about these exact topics. So I hope you enjoy the show. Before we dive into it, just a few quick things. First off, if you're watching on Rumble, thank you for supporting a free speech platform. Make sure you hit that thumbs up, leave a comment, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, every show is done as a podcast as well as a video. So if you prefer to listen, go to your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, etc., and find me on there. So let's go ahead and jump into this conversation with Chris Prosh. Chris, man, it's good to have you back on the show. I think the last time we did this was around, maybe it was the election, 2020, was that 2024 by this point? I feel like that the years have just all blended together. But anyway, it's been a while, and it's good to have you on here.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun last time. I think we were on election night 2024 for like 6 hours, just making sure no nonsense happening. And we had the pleasure of having General Flynn on too. So it was a great night.
Oh yeah. That was gosh, how much has changed since then. I feel like I don't even recognize the world anymore, which maybe that's by design, right? So we're going to be hitting on a handful of different topics, but I think that the underlying theme with this discussion is, I think, helping people assemble the toolkit, the mental toolkit to survive a world where propaganda is everywhere, and not just propaganda on CNN or Fox News, even at the influencer level, at the subtle algorithm, kind of AI-driven algorithm manipulation. I mean, there's so much, but actually there's ways to be centered to see through it, right? And I think that we'll be hitting on a lot of that. But also, you're someone that follows politics closer than I do. I've become a little more of a, I'm not going to say I'm a black pillar, because I feel very I feel really good actually, because I feel like I've just taken control into my own hands instead of relying on DC. But I do want to talk to you about midterms and just in light of everything that's happened recently, especially with the Epstein files and the complete lack of trust in the institution. So we'll get to that, but let's go ahead. Well, before we jump in, I'll pull up your Substack, just so people have it, which we'll be referencing it a few different times today. So it's PMG, which is it's at PMG100. I'll make sure that the link to it is in the description. But you've got a really, really good Substack, which is very analytical. You know, you're not just saying, oh, the media is lying. You're saying, okay, here's 100 examples of the media being caught in a lie. And you're calling out both sides too in this, which I appreciate. But anyway, so we'll come back to that as we kind of go throughout the show. I just want to bring people's attention to it and encourage them to subscribe. It's $10 a month on Substack. It's good content helping people. Really, I think, as you say here, honest questions for people tired of being managed, right? That's what it is. Like, people are tired of being engineered and manipulated. And so it's about asking these honest questions. So anyway, let's kind of dive in, or I'll let you dive into first taking a look at what you're seeing happening with the media. Because obviously we know the media is very controlled, but you're seeing patterns that many won't see. Something strange is happening with the silver market right now, and most people have no idea. Pause for a second and think about this. Why is silver up nearly 200% in the past year? Bank of America's head of metals research just released a report saying that silver could hit $309 an ounce this year. That's Bank of America saying this. At the same time, the U.S. Mint has paused silver sales because prices are moving so fast they can't keep up. That doesn't happen in normal markets. What's going on is a global silver squeeze, with countries around the world scrambling to lock up physical silver while supply tightens. And at the same time, the old paper price rigging system, the LBMA and the COMEX, is starting to crack, which means the real value of silver and gold is beginning to emerge. Yes, silver is already at a historic high, but many experts believe this move is just getting started as the paper market breaks down and physical supply gets squeezed even further. Honestly, this could be a rare opportunity to build real generational wealth, but the window's closing. Right now, Noble Gold is still able to maintain a reliable supply of physical silver at fair prices while others are running dry. This isn't financial advice. Do your own research, but don't ignore what's happening. The window is closing. So take action today by visiting goldwithseth.com or calling 877-646-5347. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 877-646-5347.
Yeah, I think that's first off, thank you for the shout out. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, we're heading into a midterm. It's there's nothing more hilarious, when Trump won in 2024. And when I'll never forget, he flew to the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, opening back up again. And I'll never forget how all the European heads of state reacted to him. It was like a king walking through this giant, beautiful cathedral, because they all wanted to be on his good side, because now he gave the impression that he's learned from his first term. And when he finally got in office, in January 2025, almost unanimously, all the media pivoted to being nice to him. YouTube backed off of censorship, or at least pretended to. Mark Zuckerberg had that famous Joe Rogan interview where he's like, yeah, the Biden administration and the FBI coerced me, into censoring Christians and conservatives, libertarians, really anybody who was the enemy of the Biden administration, which was, probably 3 to 4 fifths of the country. But no, it's just, we're living in an age where they don't want us thinking. It's a sad day when 90% of mainstream media, Washington Post is owned by, a liberal, Jeff Bezos. Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook, and Instagram. I don't know how that's, not violating antitrust laws, or the fact that Google owns YouTube, same thing. CNN, oh my gosh, MSNBC. I mean, all these major media outlets are literally owned by major Democrat donors, and and Fox News isn't much better. I mean, I'll never forget how they were in 2020. When that election night happened. I mean, there was a lot of oddities happening, but and even more recently with all the ICE protests, it's sickening to see The Hill and CNN and the Washington Post, New York Times, almost unanimously covering the exact same narrative because we're in midterms, they want to diminish Trump's support and power in DC, and they want to flip the House. They know they're not going to get the Senate, that's just a physical impossibility, but they might get the House by 5 to 10 votes.
And so, I mean, even looking where all this is going, I mean, okay, right now we've just had these Epstein files come out, and they are damning is putting it so lightly, the information contained in here. And what I'm seeing, though, is you're seeing kind of two sides to this. You're seeing that the Trump administration is basically saying, well, nothing prosecutable in there. No arrests are going to happen. Trump is like, oh, it's planted information. It's a Democrat hoax. And they've kind of pretty unanimously taken that position. But you also have people on the other side, even some Democrat lawmakers, et cetera, now coming out and they're saying, well, Trump's name was in there quite a lot, and there's some pretty damning things, and even some sworn testimony about, some very damning things, threats to people's family, dead children. I mean, just people can go look and for themselves, they want to see it. And I mean, I feel like it has us at a really strange crossroads, because I think that for a lot of people, myself included, it's like I feel very politically homeless right now. And it's very freeing. I like the feeling of it. It's like I am not a Republican, but I'm not a Democrat. And it's almost like I feel like even saying I'm a libertarian is still participating in that system, where it's like my view is the whole system is corrupted. And if you didn't see it before the Epstein files came out, you now see it, that it is corrupted in immeasurable ways. And so even looking at heading into the midterms, it's like, well, it's like, do I vote for this politician that's probably got, dirt on him from Epstein, or someone else, or that politician from the same, this one says he's a conservative, yet we hear through the rumor mills that he's kind of diddling boys on the side, and this person says this. I mean, I just find that, and maybe this is by design, that everything feels so chaotic, and you don't know who to trust anymore. And it used to be that you could trust the media. Then obviously that fell apart. Then it was that you could say trust your influencers you're following. We've seen a lot of these influencers have now shown to be part of influence networks and have all kinds of terrible things, kind of hidden under their rug. And so how do you make sense of all this?
Just understanding the power dynamics. If you look at, some of these influencers who are, oddly receiving money from foreign interests and foreign countries, they'll just play it off saying, oh, well, it's irrelevant from where they're at. They can be from Dubai or the UAE, or they can, be from Saudi Arabia or Germany. They're just advertisers. That's all they are. They'll just play it down. But they purposefully, even conservative ones, they purposefully bury the leads because they don't really want us looking there. But even back to the Epstein things, as well, when President Trump was campaigning for his reelection, in 23, 24, and 25, I guess when he got into 25, he made big promises of exposing the deep state, and I believe he was trying his best to keep his promises when Doge, and Elon were there, and Rasmussen, they showed strong polling that most of Americans actually supported overwhelmingly. I mean, people in America are screaming and demanding accountability. But with the Epstein files, what's funny was there was a similar poll that came out showing RFK Jr. is actually the most popular member of Trump's cabinet. Who's not the most popular member of his cabinet? Attorney General Bondi. She's not the most popular because she promised transparency with the Epstein files, and she said within 3 to 6 months. Well, now it's over a year. And she plays it down again. She says, well, there was thousands of pages of documents to go through. We had to be sensitive to privacy matters to the victims and their families. And the reality is no justice will come from it. I mean, the fact that major banking institutions like JP Morgan have paid out tens of millions of dollars already to these victims' families, and we can't know what happened, who was involved, or even the victims, because of massive NDAs they put in place for a massive payoff. I mean, it's just like I was talking to a lawyer just yesterday. The fact that Hillary Clinton is coming with her husband to Congress to testify, people are like, oh, well, we're going to get some justice here. No, we're not. It's going to be closed door hearings. And she and her lawyer demanded that she does not have to swear an oath to tell the truth. So it's like, what's the point of her even coming to Congress then? It's just going to be more of the same old kangaroo court nonsense where the politicians will know exactly what's happening, but the people will get absolutely nothing. It's going to be a giant blame shifting.
But it's like, where do we go from here? Because if you look at this system, and let's just use the midterms as an example, and I remember thinking, heading into 2024 election and into 2025, the thinking was, okay, well, if Trump has this landslide, he basically controls Congress. We kind of stacked, right? We've got the FBI, kind of, this big shuffling of all these different key positions, right? Earlier on there was, people like Joel Salatin that was going to be advising the USDA, and before Pam Bondi, it was Matt Gaetz, who's pretty much a firebrand. He lives up to his the name of his show.
Yeah, he does.
But if you look at where things are at right now, I mean, yes, there have been some positive things that have happened, of course, right? I think some of the kind of changes to the military and kind of pushing out a lot of the DEI narratives and all that kind of stuff. Okay, those are positive things, but it still feels like we're in the same game of just two wings of the same bird. And it's like, okay, 4 years or 8 years of your guy, 8 years of our guy, 8 years of your guy. And every single time you're thinking, okay, well, once our party gets back in, we're going to fix everything. And there was this belief that Trump was this outsider, and he was bringing people in like Kash Patel, right? Who was openly talking about the deep state and wearing his Skull Punisher shirt, and Dan Bongino, who wrote the book on Spygate. And there's this belief that this organization was not within the system, and they're going to come in and really clean house. But I'm not seeing that. And I think that a lot of Americans are feeling the same, which is why I think a lot of people, I think more than probably ever before, people feel politically homeless, especially a lot of the younger generation that finally got involved in politics, got inspired by Charlie Kirk, got inspired by a lot of the conservative values. That generation, it's not like they've all become liberals. They've all just said, screw it. Like, this is a joke. All right. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that's like, where do we even go from here?
Well, and that's why, I launched the Substack, at PMG 100, because I think people are starving for critical thinking. They're tired of being talked down to by, talking heads on CNN or Fox News, talking at you, telling you how to think and feel. People want to embrace critical thinking, and I think, honestly, that's the best thing we can do is, our founding fathers demanded that we are a moral and religious people who embrace critical thinking. When Alexis de Tocqueville, a famous writer, famous philosopher, came from Paris, France, and he studied America, right after our founding, he was impressed. He was flabbergasted at how intelligent America was, from rural farmlands to major urban cities in Boston. He was impressed because we all understood biblical principles and morality, and it wasn't a judgmental nation, where one voice spoke to all the regions and the states, and I think we've honestly lost that because people have gotten too comfortable. We on the left, the Democrats, they coalesce really around whatever the Democratic Party says. You do it in a very communist-like fashion. And I know that's a little strong, but when they purposefully removed their sitting president, Joe Biden, because he was plummeting in polling, and they had no election, and they just put Kamala Harris in there as their person. I mean, people were very angry about that. But on the right, it's the same thing with MAGA. Whatever Trump says, his people just blindly believe it. And, I voted for him, because of the very reason that you mentioned. He was an outsider. And there are massive differences between his first term and his second term. In his first term, nobody thought he'd get elected. And I don't even think I think he probably even had serious doubts. But the Republican Party was not ready for him. That's why they surrounded him with the worst, awful rhinos in the world. I mean, when you have Reince Priebus and you have, oh my goodness, Pompeo. I mean, you can't, and General Kelly, you can't find any more Mitch McConnell, Bush era rhinos to stymie and ruin an individual. But I will say he has learned I would say his cabinet now is extremely outsider based, which is good. And I think his first year was very focused on foreign policy, and I think he's done a lot of good things. But honestly, he only has one big bill passed, the big beautiful bill, and there were some good components in there, but legislatively, domestically, they're behind, and people are not happy. They want accountability, and they're demanding it now. And again, heads need to roll. People need to be arrested. I mean, look at what happened in Minnesota with Tim Walz. I mean, and I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but all this matters. Tim Walz knowingly got exposed for over $9 billion in fraud. And there was some backroom deal, and they just said, Tim, we're going to make you retire, and that's going to be your fate. No arrest, no grand hearings. But you're just going to leave quietly, kind of like what they did with Al Franken when that picture came out of him, grabbing the SNL co-stars, breasts, and some joking, picture. The party removed, and they said you're done in politics. That's not good enough for the American people. If we did something like that on the scale of Tim Walz, we'd be arrested.
Unless you're a Somali immigrant and you're,
Yeah, exactly.
And you're running 6 daycares out of a garage. But something that you mentioned, getting into the founding fathers. I know that you've also got a lot of that kind of some of your earlier articles, which I really appreciate on your Substack, getting into, kind of like what this country was built on, right? Because that's where I think that we have to be looking at right now is what is this country? What was this country, and what happened to this country? Because you mentioned, that the Constitution, it was really in the constitutional republic, it was really established for a moral and just people. And they even say in various ways that this system that they've established with the Constitution and the checks and balances will not be adequate for an immoral nation. Like those rules will no longer save us from tyranny. And so, again, if you even take a basic glance at some of the big things coming out in the Epstein files, if there's one thing that becomes apparent, it's that there is a lot of evil in this world that is concentrated in the positions of power. And that evil is very, very concentrated in our own government, our own institutions, media companies, big tech, down to the White House. It's there. And it's not just evil that, okay, maybe they're taking some bribes on the side. It's like, no, this is evil stuff that's coming out, right? Like this is Baal worship type stuff, sacrificing children type stuff. I mean, it's serious, right? As much as a lot of the conspiracy theorists were saying, oh, we're ruled by satanic pedophiles, it's kind of hard to deny it now, right? And so, I mean, if you look at our nation and look at where it's come from, say, the 1950s, and this is something I've been really thinking a lot about. It's like, what, to me, like that, obviously I wasn't alive in the 50s, but I look back and I think that, 1950s in a lot of ways represent the golden age of America, right? Post World War II, excitement coming together, land of opportunity. But I think most importantly, though, there was a shared moral fabric of this country that kept people together, kept us united. And obviously we saw in the 60s, we had a lot of communist movements coming in. We had, that's a whole kind of can of worms getting into the social engineering that came out of the 60s into the 70s. And this cultural Marxism has really eaten away at this country. And we're now a country where, I think it was one of the top issues for females voting in the election was whether or not they could still kill their own babies, right? It was like one of the driving issues was women's reproductive health, which has been, of course, I know in your Substack you cover Margaret Sanger and her origins. And so, like, looking at our country and the people that are in it, like you and I, and the Man in America audience that feel very concerned about how immoral we've become and very concerned about where the country is headed. We can fix our own selves, but the moral fabric of this nation has been completely dismantled. And I don't see a way for us to really fix this. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what it means to fix it, but it's like it's so far rotted out from the core.
Mhm.
Wait,
Well,
what do you think about this?
well, I mean, yeah, first off, yeah, I mean, you touched on so many great points about, the evils that we've allowed in our country, and I don't think it happened all at once. It was a gradual steps that we chose to overlook. And again, I think I don't think our country is, yeah, lost. I don't think we're there yet. We're pretty close. But honestly, I think it starts with just with our families at home, what you allow, you know, what you and your spouse allow, and how you raise your children, who you let them hang out with, the communities that you expose them to, how you teach them. So many times, people they get so comfortable with not asking the right questions.
Do you owe back taxes or maybe even have unfiled tax returns? Or have you filed every year, but you still keep owing? Did you retire and suddenly get hit with a tax bill you didn't expect? Or are you a business owner with messy books and a balance you can't afford? Or maybe you pulled money from your 401k or IRA early and now the IRS wants its share. However your tax issue started, the outcome is the same. Your balance isn't going down. Penalties grow, interest compounds, and many of you are about to owe again for the upcoming tax year with still no plan in place. Stop what you're doing and call Tax Network USA. The IRS isn't waiting. The IRS is enforcing collections through wage garnishments, bank levies, and property seizures. They can even file without your consent. So this is where Tax Network USA comes in. With over 15 years in business, there hasn't been a tax case they haven't seen or resolved. They specialize in tax controversies and help taxpayers nationwide get back on track by resolving back taxes and unfiled returns once and for all. Whether you owe tens of thousands of dollars or tens of millions, their team has resolved over $1 billion in tax debt. They can do the same for you, but you have to call now. So they're offering a free investigation call with the IRS. After that investigation, they put a clear case plan in place to resolve your tax problem and get you back on track. This is about using your legal rights to take control before the government sets the terms for you. So do not wait for another IRS letter or a frozen bank account. Call 1-800-958-1000. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/MIA or click the link in the description below.
That we completely lose ourselves. If a priest or a pastor offends us, we're just done with church completely. When we never go back. If one political candidate lies to us, we're done. We're just done forever. I don't think that's the attitude we should really be embracing. I think we should be demanding better of ourselves, better, of our communities, and better of who we choose to elect. But we can be more, we can scrutinize more, and what I mean by that is, as a society, we've allowed situationism to just dominate us. The lesser of two evils argument is completely ridiculous. Like, well, yeah, Democrats are bad, but Republicans, they're okay. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, well, Democrats are just socialists and communists, but Republicans are just cowards. And at least they vote right on one or two things. That's the wrong mindset to have. We should be cut and clear in what we believe, what we support, and only support candidates who actually believe in all of those universally. Not just the idea that we have single voter issues is completely ludicrous. You're telling me you're going to vote for one politician because they agree with you on pro-life or abortion issues, but everything else you're going to completely forget about. And they do that on purpose. They do that on purpose. What was one of the biggest lies ever perpetuated upon American people was when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and there was no constitutional basis for that whatsoever. And the left would say, oh, he's removed the right for women to choose. I'm like, no, they brought it back to the states to decide for themselves. So if anything, they constitutionally let the states decide. So there should be no federal, nowhere in the Constitution, nowhere does it embrace you literally choosing to kill your child. So it's just it's really fighting back against what we're told. I cannot tell you how many college kids I've had arguments with, on politics, where they're literally regurgitating whatever CNN told them, literally verbatim. And there's absolutely no critical thinking. And I urge all parents to demand better of your children and really teach them, strong fundamental morals, from a Bible believing nation, but also teaching them, how to look past the facade of lies. I mean, one of the many reasons I got out of politics after a decade was because so many Republicans were lying to me saying, "Oh, I'm a pro-life. I have an A+ pro-life, from these local state organizations." But yet they voted for the budget bill every year, which had funding for Planned Parenthood in it. It's just I can't. The hypocrisy was almost too much to handle. I think people are tired of it. I think they're exhausted from being talked down to.
Well, and so I'm glad that you mentioned the church, because when I'm thinking about how the country goes from, even what it was in the 50s to what it is right now,
Yeah.
it's like, whose responsibility is it to maintain the morality of a nation? Obviously, I think that you could say, well, it starts in your own home. It's the responsibility of the father, right? And setting the tone. It's, the mother and how the children are raised, the school and the values the schools are, teaching. And we see that the schools have been taken over and whatnot. But, America, you could say at one point that America was a very Christian country, right? And that it was really built on those Christian values. And we've seen, though, over time, right, the separation of church and state, the the nonprofit status for churches, and all these different things, that they've been completely neutered. And the way I look at it is, I'm not a big fan of, say, religion per se, right? Because it can be used in very bad ways, as it has throughout history. But I'd also believe that a core tenet of just believing in God is believing that there are a pretty universal set of values of right and wrong, almost the 10 commandments, you might say, right? And so, I mean, how is it that churches across this nation have, in many ways, just sat idly and watched this moral decay happen? Obviously, some of them have even been very participatory in the moral decay and pushing these agendas. And so what blame do you place on the church for where things are at in this country, that we've allowed ourselves to get to a place where we're ruled by potentially satanic pedophiles, to put it bluntly, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a study that came out, that showcases, I think there's one church for every 400 people in America, and those are, in the beginning, those are great odds, great numbers, and it started, in my opinion, back in the 40s and 50s. The church allowed itself to be muzzled. Lyndon B. Johnson was a horrible, terrible, awful racist president. His own audio tapes prove that. I mean, he was a horribly disgusting president. And ironically, Democrats never want to talk about him, or Woodrow Wilson. But what's funny, though, is he got his law passed, and he forced churches to be to sign with the IRS for this tax exempt status, which ironically before that they were already tax exempt. So it was a complete redundancy. It was a legal tool to threaten them to lose something that they already had. And so that was the first step. The churches didn't do the research. They did not think, from a legal perspective, how do we protect ourselves? They just blindly obeyed. And I think that was one of the first catalysts of when the church and the pastors said, they got backed into a corner and they said, "Don't hurt me." And then, over the 60s and 70s and 80s, pastors, if you notice, historically, pastors stopped talking about the issues of divorce. They stopped talking about abortion. They stopped talking about, homosexuality. They stopped talking. They stopped asking and talking about the hard questions. They just replaced, because a church is important. If you're going to be a Bible-believing Christian in this country, people have to understand that a church is important. Especially during COVID, there was a massive rise in, I don't need to go to church to be a good Christian. Well, first off, that's antithetical to what Jesus literally taught. That's the same logic of saying, well, I don't need to be at home to be a good husband. If you want to go through the sanctification process, you need to submit to a pastor and those who are better learned than you in the Bible to become stronger in your faith. And you do need to be surrounded by a community where you can literally grow in the name of Jesus, if that's your prerogative of being a Christian. But so many people, when the pastor stopped asking the hard questions, fathers in particularly stop enforcing the hard questions, and I think that's where the moral decay came from. We started being okay with, oh, it's okay, casual sex is fine, that's okay. If you get pregnant, no big deal, just have an abortion, it's okay, that's fine. All that stopped. And now we're just so okay with being lied to. We're so okay with moral depravity. It's really, it's had a horrendous impact on our nation. And even the term church and state is laughable. Like, this is a shining example of why I created, PMG, is because people have no idea what separation of church and state actually means. People have this ill-conceived notion of what they are regurgitating of lies that they've heard. Most people would say, if you asked 50,000 people in America, what does separation of church and state actually mean? It means you keep church and politics separate. That's not what it means. The founding fathers would never have agreed with that. What it meant was, when our nation was founded, when the Pilgrims came here, they were literally fleeing religious institutions and government institutions polluting against the people. At the time of our founding as a nation, King James in England had a decree. He told the clergy in his nation what they would exactly preach on to the masses. It was illegal, almost widespread in Europe at that time, for an individual to own a Bible. It was almost widespread illegal. The Netherlands allowed it to a certain extent. What people came here for was a true separation of church and state, where the individuals and the states could implement a state religion if they so chose. Like, Georgia was a Baptist state, Pennsylvania was a Quaker state, but it was illegal. And pastors in the churches could be involved in government, federally or state. They absolutely could. And Jesus commands us in the Great Commission. But the federal government has zero authority, zero, over the church. They cannot pass any laws whatsoever. And that's why the COVID era was so tumultuous for so many people, because the government, both Republicans, Democrats, both of them completely forgot their constitutional oaths, and they abused the church, they abused Christians, they abused the individual citizens, and they went after all of them hard. And they tried locking churches down, they tried locking schools down, and they succeeded in numerous ways. But the government had no authority to do so. They had none.
Yet here we are, where the government's back to, as we saw, shutting churches down for not masking or any of the, having jab requirements. I have family that are conservative and really see things, I think, very straight, and they got injured through following the advice of their pastor, saying, "Hey, you better take this thing. It's going to protect you. It's good for you. It's going to save you from grandma. And if you're a good Christian citizen, you should do this to keep your country safe." And so, and I might push back a little bit, which I'm not really kind of opposing, but you mentioned kind of people finding a church and finding a pastor, and it's like, well, I mean, isn't a church just people that could be in your home, right? It could be just you and 5 of your close family friends that come together and study together and kind of share. Because I think that when there's this mentality that you need to go through a gatekeeper, right, or have someone who's really studied, how he got a degree in theology to help interpret these things and interpret the Bible. I feel like that's kind of been the same recipe where things have gone awry over and over throughout history. Where, as you mentioned, it was so extreme before that most people couldn't even read. They couldn't read Latin. And so they had to go to the church to have the Bible interpreted for them, right? And so, I think it's good to have a strong community. And if you have a good pastor, great. But I think there's a lot of churches and a lot of pastors that have absolutely been compromised. I mean, I know that Trevor Loudon's a mutual friend of both of us, and he's covered that extensively, how much the global communist movement has infiltrated the church system.
Absolutely.
So anyway, what do you think on that?
No, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that thousands of churches across the country have been completely compromised by woke ideology. They've completely, thrown out the gospel, Jesus' teachings, the Bible. They've completely thrown all of that out, because they want attendance, because they want to be culturally appropriate. But I still believe there are good churches out there that, are Bible believing, that, lead the community, lead the family, lead the father the way they're supposed to be for the betterment of their children, really. But yes, Jesus did say, absolutely, where 2 or 3 are worshiping in my name, I am there also. But, he also wanted us to, again, go to a place for community where we can learn together. And it's not that we can't learn together. But there are times, numerous times in the Bible, where parables are lost on us. We don't understand the meaning behind them, and we need the extra encouragement and the extra learning from someone who actually has the background, who actually has maybe the degrees in there to really help us understand. Because there's so many points of it really where people have like, oh, I don't understand this. I don't get that. Like, I mean, if like, as an example, if I'm sitting here asking you, well, how are the 10 Commandments structured? Most people wouldn't be able to tell me. And I'd be like, well, the first 4 are about our direct relationship to God, and the last 6 are about our relationship with our neighbors, with our community. It's just like that level of ecclesiology, that level of theology. Really, you need that extra level of encouragement at a local body under the right strong pastor, under the right church who understands, hey, abortion is not okay. Hey, we take marriage very seriously here. Hey, we take child rearing very seriously here. And again, I understand in certain parts of the country, it's very hard to find that. And if you can't, then I completely, urge the finding of community where you can find it. But yeah, like I said, it's Jesus demanded us. He wanted us to be in a collection at a church. Even another example. Even if I tell you, what is the real purpose of marriage? This is another example of our analytical thinking process that are just lost. If I asked you what's the real definition of marriage, people would say, "Oh, well, I love my spouse," or "Oh, well, I got pregnant and now we're getting married."
I thought it was really about just getting a full-time cook. That was why I signed up for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Some would say that.
That's a joke, tongue in cheek. I'm a good husband. I do a lot of cooking. I change diapers. Don't worry.
But yeah, but most people forget. Jesus literally said, marriage is to be a reflection of his love for the church. The church was literally his bridegroom. And husbands are to reflect Jesus' commitment and love and sacrificial love to the church, and the church was meant to submit to his authority and teaching.
And so, if we've established, going back to the founding fathers, right?
Course,
if we've established that, and I forget the exact quote, like I could look it up, but I don't want to take them to do it right now. But where it's basically saying that this Constitution is for a moral and just people, right? And that without that morality, there's nothing to save them from the chains of tyranny, right? And I think that to me, that is at the heart of everything that we're dealing with right now. Is that simple thing? Is that even if you look at it, I'm not going to pretend to look at things through God's eyes, but you look at it through historical context. What happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? What happened when nations have fell? It's like, does our nation deserve divine providence, or does it have the divine providence? Does it deserve protection? Yeah. Is it a nation? It's like a lot of people are, so they're praying for the nation, but it's like, well, is our nation? Do we deserve to be preserved as a nation, or has our nation become so corrupted and on a global level, this government and its arms, its tentacles have put so much immoral information out there? Like, look at how much Hollywood influences trends globally, right?
Yeah.
It makes you really reflect on that. Is like, that's the crux of the matter. And so if the people that form this nation set forth this basic principle of, you must be a moral nation, otherwise everything that we're working into this Constitution and Bill of Rights will not protect you from tyranny. Yet here we are, right? An immoral nation that is struggling with tyranny, right? And tyranny from like very evil people, which we've now discovered. It seems to me the only way that we can reverse this is for our nation to become moral again. Like, you can't vote morality into office, right? You can't, that's not going to work. And so how do we, like, when you can't even agree on gender with a portion of the nation, it doesn't matter what side you're on. It's just, that's a core difference in a fundamental thing about understanding how the world works, right? But if we can't agree on those things, how can we possibly get back to a place where our nation has shared moral values again? Because if we can't do that, where do we go from here?
Again, that's a fantastic question, one I've thought about numerous times. I mean, I think it starts with all of us individually asking the right questions. My brother and I talk about this all the time. Just turn off your TV. Start reading books again. Start thinking for yourself critically again. Start asking the right questions. That's not. I mean, that's always our first step. That's the whole reason why we created PMG is for someone to please start asking the right questions. But back to your earlier comment though about Sodom and Gomorrah, or even, and I'll give you some other examples. I believed at a certain point, our nation was a strong Christian nation, and I think we still have pockets where people are doing quite well and doing it the right way. It'll never ever be promoted by the media ever. But when God was on that hill with Abraham, and they were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham was debating with him, arguing with him, like, please spare the city. If there's just 1,000 righteous men in there, please save the city. If there's just 100 righteous men, please save the city. And they got all the way down to one. If there's just one righteous man, just please save the city. And I've often thought to myself, what if that's America? What if we're slowly losing our righteousness, our ability to, because you're right. I mean, the fact that we're arguing, because, and it comes down to the definition of, truth. The left would say truth doesn't matter, doesn't exist. Truth is completely subjective. It's completely subjective off of what I feel and what I think, and I have my own truths. No, somebody needs to put on their big boy pants again and say, no, truth is objective. You can have debates about things, but there are certain things that are just, they never change. And one of them is, as an example, gender. Only one gender can have children. And the fact that we're having this debate, even today, saying men can get pregnant, that's a massive, massive lie that they're getting away with. And to force our entire medical establishment to embrace those lies is leading to so many problems. But they're doing it on purpose because they want to create more division. But I think we're not quite at the Sodom and Gomorrah moment. There was a beautiful passage I read years ago. In 1453, when the Ottoman Empire was besieging the walls of Constantinople, nowadays modern day Istanbul, there had been numerous writings about this. The level of arrogance in the city of Constantinople, the last Byzantine, Eastern Roman Empire, the last real fall, the church leaders, when the city was being besieged, and there's cannon fire, there's musket fire, people are dying. Where was the church leaders at? Where was the academic elites at? They were sitting in their cathedral, debating what color eyes Jesus really had. And I think that's where America's at, is that we're sitting in our arrogance, asking the wrong questions, while our children are being wrongfully taught, while we're being lied to. And if I push someone on the truth, they may agree with you. And even that's the saddest part too. Even people who agree with you, they still don't want the confrontation. People in America are famously introverted, where they don't want to be bothered. They don't like loud noises. They don't like someone confronting them. And even in a respectful manner, they can't handle it. And I think that's honestly the where we start. We have to change how we think, or just go back to the basics and just say, you know what, you're right. I've been, and we're all guilty of it. I've been a coward. I've let things slip, but no more. And I think it starts again with the family, with the church, with the community, and with our politicians, and sitting down and asking the hard questions. I'll never forget Ron DeSantis. He came to our church, and he's a strong Catholic, and he came to our evangelical church. I didn't pull any punches. I got up and I asked him about his donor base. And I said, why does your donor base have such strong ties to the Bush family in Texas, who wanted you to run for president? And he got very cagey, and he did not want to answer those questions in public. And I think that's, and again, I'm not saying do it in a disrespectful manner, but that was a shining example where people don't want to answer the tough questions.
And so is that part of what you're referring to? Here's one of your articles on your PMG Substack, Faith Without Sanitization, Why Comfort Christianity Collapses Under Pressure, right?
Yeah.
He says, in an age of curated feeds, feel-good sermons, and mega churches promising your best life now, a sanitized version of Christianity has taken root, one that airbrushes the cross, downplays suffering, and markets faith as a path to uninterrupted comfort, health, and wealth. This is Comfort Christianity, a polished, consumer-friendly gospel that avoids the raw edges of Scripture It's
Yeah.
attractive in times of ease, but it crumbles when life applies pressure. And I love that last sentence there. It's attractive in times of ease. It's kind of like communism, right? It's attractive when things are not that bad, right? For your average kid going to school and, hey, down with the patriarchy, right? It's like, well, you see, you're going to need that, that same strong kind of redneck in your class you're accusing of being a racist, homophobic,
Yeah.
bigot. Like that guy's the guy that can actually protect you when an enemy is knocking at your door. So
Mhm.
why don't you just expand on this a little more, actually, on what you're really kind of hitting on here with this particular article?
Yeah, I mean, again, faith without sanitization. I mean, I worked closely with Trevor Loudon about that. He had a wonderful documentary that came out years ago, showcasing again, a slew of churches and pastors that were really, you know, not even being bombarded by leftism or wokeism or socialism, but just a full embrace of it. And one of the major focal points was the Southern Baptist Convention. They were taking money from foreign interest groups, from BlackRock, from numerous hedge funds. And what was happening was and what's funny is, for people to understand the SBC, they used to be one of the strongest lobbying arms, of the right in Congress, for Christian conservatism. But they've been so strong armed by woke ideology, and they created this subsidiary group called the North American Mission Board, where it's like a tentacle, to use your previous analogy, where they will help churches, predominantly Acts 29 plant churches, where they will help churches financially. But with that money comes strict strings of what they will not talk about, and how they will preach, and literally some pastors have actually gotten caught verbatim reciting the same sermons over and over again. And so it's been exposed so heavily in a documentary called um, Enemies Within the Church. It was a fantastic film documentary, but North American Mission Board has been exposed so heavily, and I believe like the last three presidents of SBC have all had to leave because of scandals. And I think the current one was oh my goodness, he was he's a famous Texas Democrat, and now he's the leader of the SBC. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. So it's the fact that they purposely put conflating figures in organizations that used to be completely unanimous in their beliefs and mindsets. But it's just, again, that's a shining example where the SBC has knowingly let in people that do not align with them at all, religiously, politically, and they wonder why they have problems. And I think that's coming down to the more and more churches. There's a big scandal 3 years ago that when all they got exposed, but we're seeing overall. And again, I know we covered a lot of things here today, Seth, but it's so important people understand the glaring hypocrisy in church institutions and political institutions and power structures. But I believe what's happening across this country is people are becoming more decentralized. It used to be we would fight for a community, we'd fight for our statehood, we would fight for our rights. Now we're getting so decentralized to the point where even churches, they're not affiliated with massive state groups or nationally recognized groups. What's happening is the evangelical movement is growing in America because it's a singular church by itself, minding its own business, that has no strings to anybody else. And I think it's actually a blessing in disguise. And it's the same thing in media too. Mainstream media has gotten caught in so many lies, from Jussie Smollett lies to COVID lies. It's no wonder people like you and Dan Bongino and Joe Rogan are so popular, because we've even decentralized our media. People are like, no more CNN, no more Fox News. I can't handle it. I want authenticity. I want reality. And people are craving this face-to-face interaction. They want again the real questions to be asked. And I think honestly that's a big catalyst in a positive way, to address your previous questions.
Yeah, and I think that what it comes down to, you mentioned decentralization, and what I think it's why there's been such a push for the technocratic control, because the technocracy allows control even of a single individual. But that's even limited. But I think that it's a good point though, the decentralization, because I think that's ultimately what we need to have happen is that it's like, what is the ultimate decentralization of morality, right? It means I have my own worldview. I have my own principles of what is right and wrong, and I'm going to filter everything through that. I'm not going to allow a pastor to tell me what's right or wrong. I'm not going to allow the media to tell me or a politician to tell me. I think, and that's what we need to see more of. I think that we are seeing more and more of it happening, where people are just, they're kind of opting out in a good way, though, right? You're seeing more people moving into homesteading, into homeschooling their children, into, building family compounds, doing all kinds of things to exit the system. And I think that's ultimately what we need to have happen, is because any system, as Epstein is such a prime example for it, systems can be compromised, right? You can control 1,000 workers in a labor union by compromising the single person in charge of that particular labor union, right? You can control the spiritual views of 10,000 church members by compromising a single pastor, right?
Exactly.
And that's the problem. Is, I agree with you. Yeah, okay, so having a pastor that can help share his interpretation of certain things, it's great. It's the same thing as, say, sitting down with your friend or family and say, okay, what'd you pull out of this section right here? Which is helpful. But I think that it's about people actually becoming strong on their own again, developing their own moral compass, measuring things against that, trusting their own gut, trusting their own intuition, trusting their own relationship with God, right? And saying, whether you're looking at a politician and listening to him or listening to a pastor, always asking, do I agree with this, right? Is this what feels right to me in my own intuition? And I do think that gives me hope, because we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah, and I think there's a lot of good people in America, actually. I think America, by and large, is a lot of really, really good people.
Absolutely.
But they've been so heavily targeted with psychological operations and propaganda that their goodness has been hidden and covered up and distracted. But I also think that as more of this information comes out and people become more aware of these power structures, they're going to naturally stop trusting the institutions and the governments and the politicians and the media even more than they do right now, which is already at a record low. And that's where we have to get to.
Well, and it's honestly just understanding reality. I mean, because you can understand reality and how things are going to happen. You can also, ask tough questions. And I kind of put it into two different buckets, like with the Epstein stuff. I fervently believe we're never going to have justice with the Epstein files. We're never, it's understanding how the political game is played. Regardless of which president is in the White House, I never believe we're going to get any justice for the Epstein files. And the reason behind it is literally because we all know on that list, probably a third of Hollywood is on that list, and there have been some names leaked online, some pretty big, powerful people in Hollywood. There's also half the media, and honestly, there's probably a third of Congress on that list. I mean, people don't understand, what would happen tomorrow if President Trump said gloves are off. We're going after everybody. There'd probably be, at a minimum, at least 1,000 people that would be arrested and arraigned. And then we'd be bogged down to probably about 15 to 20 years of endless hearings. And some would probably go to prison. Some would probably get a slap on the wrist and pay a fine. Some probably get exonerated. But I don't think the politicians want to have the next 15 to 20 years of politics dominated by endless, judicial hearings. I don't think they want to have. I don't think they want to answer for those things. And I think that's the biggest reason why we'll never know truly what happened. We won't know the victims. We won't know who was all there, because both parties and too many major institutions. I mean, you literally have the members of the British royal family on that list, and I think one of them are really going to get hit, get thrown under the bus. It's just a matter of time. But it's understanding that reality of the political, unfortunate, and I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying, sit back and ask yourselves what this would look like if everything we wanted happened. It would be 15 to 20 years of endless. I mean, you thought the O.J. Simpson trial was long and annoying for a year or two? It'd be 10 times that. and it'd be vicious, and there'd be hundreds of millions, billions spent, and it'd be, I mean, it would be disastrous, for so many people, righteously, because of what they did. But then you look at the secondary part, with how the media would react, and I don't even think the media would know how to react. They wouldn't even know who to cover for. They wouldn't even know who to protect. Do we protect Hollywood? Do we protect the Democrat politicians? Do we go after the Republican politicians? Like how would this even, like, it would create an impossibility of not knowing what they would even want to do. It's like the fabrication of these ICE raids in Minnesota. Okay, so you're telling me that Minnesota is 2.2% of all deportations across the country, and they've had all these horrible things happening, but yet 1 in 4 deportations is in Texas, and they have zero problems going on. Again, where's the outrage for Laken Riley? Where's the outrage for that poor Ukrainian girl who was killed in North Carolina? It's just you cannot. I mean, and like even that just I laugh so much over the insanity. It's like, what are you guys exactly protesting? Criminal illegal immigrants who over 70% are repeat criminal offenders, but yet no outrage, no justice for the citizens who have been killed. Okay, it's just again, so it's understanding the reality, the complex of what you're asking, but it's also recognizing the complete fabrication of that we're okay with as a society. But call it what it is. It's not news. It's entertainment.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I think that really kind of gets to the core of the issue, is that we have to be able to have honest conversations again.
Yes.
And that's a big part of it. You mentioned the politeness of the Americans. It's funny because my wife, Kate, is Australian. And that's one thing I appreciate about her, is that, as you know, because you know her well, she's not worried about offending you, right? If you screw up, she'll say, hey, you screwed that up. Like, that sucks, right? But I appreciate it because, like, I think coddling us is what gets us in this place where you think, you don't see the real problems. And obviously Australia has a lot of its own issues, but by and large, the Australians that I know, they're blunt and they will call you out on something. They'll pull you up on something. And that's important. So that's also, again, why I appreciate having these conversations, but why I think what you're doing with PMG is really important, is because if I were to look at this and see what is the theme of this, right? The theme of your Substack and your posts and the content on there, it's that you're having the real conversation that people need to be having. But you're not doing it in a divisive way where you're pitting left against right. I mean, you're just, like you said, honest questions for people who are tired of being managed. And that's really, really important. And I also think it's really important because I think that's why a lot of people tune into my show, is because they feel like, gosh, finally someone's saying something that is exactly what I'm thinking. And because people are very isolated, right? That's the other thing. A lot of people are very alone. They can't have these kinds of conversations. Maybe they've got, the one couple in their church they talk to, or there's that one uncle that they can talk to. But for a lot of people, by design, they can't talk about a lot of these things. And so there's even a lot of, I think, value in that, and just thinking, gosh, finally someone that is just speaking honestly about things. That's not controlled, not bought and paid. Anyway, I'll make sure that your Substack is in the description, and I really encourage people to check it out and subscribe to it and support what you're doing, because we need to have more of these honest conversations. And I think that anyone who's willing to have these conversations really deserves to have the right kind of attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just, as a society, we need to start asking the right questions, and we're not. If you were not, and people need to ask themselves for their own benefit too. If you were not outraged and angry over Laken Riley being murdered, if you were not outraged over the thousands of Americans who are killed by illegal immigrants every single year, but yet you were selectively outraged over Alex Preddy because the media told you to be outraged, then you're a part of the problem. And I'm not saying you're a bad person, but you need to start thinking about things. You start asking yourself better questions, because this even in there, I have an article about selective outrage is not justice. You can absolutely be upset about an injustice happening, but if you're not equally outraged over all the injustices, then you're a part of the problem. Martin Luther King Jr., was 100% right. Any injustice anywhere is an injustice to all of us, and it's something we need to, seriously think about. But don't react just because the media is telling you to, just because The Hill and the Washington Post are collaborating to, promote the same narrative. It's just.
I also think from that same perspective, don't think that ICE is justified in whatever they want to do because Fox News or say Tim Pool says they should be, right? It's about being objective. It's about saying, okay, well, yeah, I recognize that there has to be this process of removing the illegals. However, I also am watching and saying, okay, let's make sure we don't have a police state, that's developing here. And it's a tricky place. I mean, we're in a very tricky situation where it's like, okay, what happens if a state governor is actually controlled by a foreign nation and is actively working to destabilize the United States, and a president wants to use federal powers to do that? I mean, it's tricky, but it's really important, though, that we stay really level-headed and realize that there's influence poking at us from every single direction. There's, trying to manipulate how we're thinking about things.
And I use this as an example, the whole ICE raids, because you're right, it is a tumultuous topic, but people have to take a 50,000-foot view and understand what caused this. And this is where I bash even Republicans very, very hard. And I say this problem started under Ronald Reagan when he made some backroom deal with Tip O'Neill and he legalized 3 million illegals overnight. And then Bill Clinton, and then George Bush Jr., and George Bush Sr., and Obama, and Biden, and Trump. When we knowingly allow our borders to be wide open to drug trafficking, cartels, human trafficking, sex trafficking for 30 years, and we have normalized it so much, of course it looks weird when we're trying to enforce the laws that have been the same since the 70s. And overwhelmingly, 99% of the operations have been legal. And you're going to have that 1% of where it looks a little rough. But I would argue the 30 years that we've tolerated with Republican and Democrat presidents and their blatant obstruction of the Constitution, people should be equally outraged over that. And it's like, when people ask about all this stuff that's going on right now, I'm like, guys, wait a minute. Let's take a look at the 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. What led up to this? You should be equally outraged about that. And it's there's nothing more laughable than orange man bad, but it's okay when Obama did the exact same thing. We need to start asking the better.
Exactly. Well, Chris, it's been great speaking with you. We'll remind people, PMG Substack. The link is in the description. It's also substack.com/@PMG100. I'll make sure that the link is in there. Sign up, support Chris in what you're doing. Share this information, have these conversations, because you could argue that the fate of our nation depends on how we act right now, and we have to get over the politeness and the politically correct. Otherwise, fire and brimstone may be falling from the sky before we know it. So, Chris, thank you, man. Any last words as we're signing off?
No, like I said, just go there, subscribe. It's just $10 a month. We're already paying $100 a month for Hulu and Netflix. So, so it's, for an opportunity to get some real, honest, critical thinking. Like I said, we love our supporters. It's only growing. Weekly commentary, videos, articles, essays, polling. It's going to be great. So again, Seth, I appreciate you. You're fantastic. You're one of the rare good ones who actually asks the right questions. but you are 100% right. Your wife is amazing and very direct.
Which is exactly what I need. I had a mother growing up that it was hard for me to do wrong in her eyes, which has its values, but it's also good to have a woman to help keep you in line. Otherwise, I'd be laying on the couch eating Cheese Whiz at midnight, right?
Well, no. The problem with you, Seth, is if you were ever a politician, you'd be called a hair candidate. So that's why everybody gives you a free pass.
What's a haircut? Is that because of my hair?
Something no, a hair candidate is like a JFK, someone who's really handsome who gets a free pass in life.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. I'll have to ask my wife. All right. Well, Chris, man, it was good talking to you. Thank you again for coming on and just keep at what you're doing. I think it's a great initiative you're working on there.
Yes, sir. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
All right.